Hi everyone, welcome to the Metal Crafter. In today's video for the SciFi series, I've made another industrial site. In this case, it's a bigger one with more tanks and pipes. I've used raw materials, some 3D printed Greebles, and even though they are basic in crafting, some new techniques I don't regularly use. Let's hit the table! I wanted for this build to be a little bit more ambitious than the previous one. The concept is still similar though, an industrial place with a few fuel tanks, but in better shape than the previous video and still operational. Nevertheless, I wanted to add a couple of horizontal tanks this time and incorporate further elements like machinery and pipes connecting them. So I started by making a draft of the main idea with no measures. I used a 20 by 30 cm MDF cut for the base, and since I used 2.5 cm squared grid in my games, would then end up with 8 by 12 squares. I went ahead and marked those on the MDF for future reference. The tanks would sit atop a concrete base, so cut a foam piece the size of the MDF. Then proceeded with a second scaled down draft on paper to better define the elements of the build and how much space they would occupy. Wanted to use two different sized vertical soda cans and two equally sized horizontal deodorant cans. The horizontal and vertical tanks would connect between them with pipes and through some piece of machinery. Then thought about adding two sets of stairs at the front of the base. Used the MDF as guide and marked the grid and elements spaces on the foam. Started by cutting both stairs from the foam and carved the steps. Then used a sharp X-Acto knife to carve the grid lines as I wanted them to have sharp edges. Glued the foam to the MDF with PVA and covered the entire base surface with construction plaster. Went over the grid lines with a toothpick not to cover the recesses with the plaster. The horizontal tanks would require some lower supports, so first took measure of the deodorant can's diameter. Then cut 3 pieces of foam per deodorant with a concave side. As usual, added some texture by covering the base with diluted PVA and then randomly spreading some regular sand. Once dried, painted the entire base with gray. Then apply a black wash. Use the same process on the concrete supports for the horizontal tanks. Wanted to simulate some dirt on the base, so went over with some brown dry brush over parts where there was more sand. With the base complete, I moved on with the tanks. First primed all cans and then started painting them. Again, I wanted to use lively colors to depict that the place is in use. Went with white and red for the vertical tanks and purple for both horizontal tanks. After a base color, I dry brushed all of them with gunmetal and also painted the ends of the horizontal tanks. Used the horizontal tanks as reference to glue the lower supports to the base with liquid silicone. I never use EVA foam in my builds, but thought it would be suitable for the tank's reinforcement metal stripes. Cut some 1 cm wide stripes and painted both faces. To easily paint the sides, I rolled them up to have a larger surface. Also painted the deodorant plastic caps as done in the previous build. Took some measures on the cans and then glued the stripes. Added a small piece of EVA and rivet to where the stripes ends meet. Then started painting the 3D prints. Got some tank doors and small pieces of machinery. Glued the doors directly over the tanks. For the machinery pieces, I first made a small cardboard template so would need to cut a hole in the tanks. Marked with a pencil, cut through with the X-Acto knife, and then glued the 3D prints. I cleaned the deodorant plastic cups with the X-Acto knife and then glued them to the tops of the tanks. Applied a black wash to all tanks with several passes. Wanted for the pipe system to be modular and able to remove it from the tanks, which would allow me to use the tanks in other settings or configurations. So rolled a piece of chipboard and superglue it to the top of the tanks. The pipes would fit inside. Added some decoupage to the chipboard to strengthen it and then painted with gunmetal. Gave it another decoupage pass afterwards. I wanted to add some of the 3D printed machinery to the tanks, so took measure of the metal stripes diameter to estimate the curve for a foam support. Marked and cut a small foam piece and then glued with liquid silicone. Painted the machinery piece and then also glued it to the support. I wanted for this machinery to be some kind of pressure or liquid detection system, so thought about adding some additional details with a small tube to take a sample of the fluid. Used a small plastic straw, added some chipboard to the ends and then painted and superglued it to the tank and the detector. Lastly, I added some light brown washes to the tanks to depict some rust. Not much though, since, as I mentioned, this should be an operative industrial place. Once the washes are dried, gave all tanks a cover of decoupage glue. I could then start with the pipe system. I regularly drink sparkling water, so got a plenty of amount of these plastic tubes, which I used as the main pipes. Started by cutting out the tops and then sanded them. I'll be using 3D prints for the 90-degree connections and some middle parts. So measured the tube's diameter and then adjusted the size of some free online STLs to fit them. Took some measures and then cut some pieces of the tubes. Both vertical tanks would connect to each other, while the horizontal ones would connect through a piece of machinery. Used superglue to connect all pieces. I had this plastic from the lower part of an old and broken plastic truck from my son and thought it could work great as a piece of machinery. I first cut and cleaned the bottom as it would be sitting vertically and then cut some holes the size of the pipes on each side. Here taking a preview look at all elements together. Continuing with the machinery, I cut and glued a piece of chipboard to cover the back and superglued some Greebles, both 3D printed and plastic pieces. Also added some chipboard to the base. Gave it a gray base as primer and then painted it in full with gunmetal. I followed the same process over all pipes. To be honest, though it is a basic tool, I never use sponges to paint my crafts, so this was another first time for this build. Thought the texture for an active though better machinery would be most suitable with this method. Used some bright brown for a first layer and did the same over the pipes. Wanting to paint the machinery with a lively color, so went with a neutral yellow afterwards. Lastly, I applied a light brown wash over the whole pipe system, and once dried, cover it with decoupage. That's it. Let's take a look at our industrial complex. I think making this build modular was the best decision. As I build more and more scenery pieces, there's less space where to store them. So making it modular helps reducing the space it occupies, but can also use its elements individually in different encounters. I have mixed feelings about the EVA foam. On one side, it's super flexible, which makes it very easy to handle, and its texture allows to easily glue it and paint it. On the other side, I think the one I used was too thick and should get a thinner one. I really like the sponge painting method though, and will definitely use it in further futuristic and apocalyptic crafts. Merging both raw materials and 3D prints brings the best of both worlds, and it's something I'll be implementing in my crafts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and I hope it inspires you to make your own builds. Also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That encourages me to keep sharing what I do, as it's all from the heart. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook to see further pictures and announcements. I'll see you in the next craft.